Today I'll be chatting with Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro about diet culture, weight stigma, healthism, and the health at every size movement. Whether or not these concepts are familiar or new to you, I assure you that you're in for some great food for thought. Our conversation focuses on bridging the gap between two camps. One camp prioritizes the pursuit of physical health and weight loss, sometimes with a hint of moral obligation. Another camp advocates for weight-neutral approaches and greater recognition of the harmful consequences of diet culture. Dr. Fundaro brings a wonderful blend of science and compassion to the conversation that I hope you enjoy as much as I do. This episode is part one of a two-part conversation. In the next piece, we discuss weight-neutral dietary approaches, including intuitive eating. Dr. Gabrielle Fundaro holds a PhD in nutrition, foods, and exercise from Virginia Tech and is a certified health and nutrition coach. You can follow her on social at VitaminPhD and find out more about her coaching and her latest research on her website, VitaminPhDnutrition.com. Let's dig in. Welcome to Get Real Health. I'm your host, Dr. Chana Davis. This show cuts through the noise to give you science-based insights from real experts so that you can make smart, healthy choices. Welcome to the show, Dr. Fundaro. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It's an honor.
So we have about a million different topics I want to get into. So just to be clear, my goal really is to work together to just whet people's appetite and plant some seeds to learn more, to kind of probe internally on your own biases and assumptions. So there's no intent to try and do justice to any of these many things we're going to get into. But so just to throw out some of the terms, and I honestly don't know quite where to begin, but I want to touch on diet culture, anti-diet culture, health at every size movement, and healthism. So I know you've written and thought a lot about all of these topics. Where do you suggest beginning? And just, sorry, one more thing before I turn it over. A lot of my audience, like myself, are pretty naive about these things. Like I talked to my husband last night, never heard of the word healthism. So I know that you're in the industry. And so a lot of people in your world, this is not that new, but for many people, we just need some different definitions maybe to get us started.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I think healthism is probably a lesser known term, even within the fitness industry. There are quite a few people who were unfamiliar with it or may have had some misconceptions or misunderstandings about what it actually means. Mm-hmm. And, interestingly, the primary piece of literature that people refer to was a heuristic essay. So that means that the author was writing about it to learn about it. And that's now one of my favorite words because I think that's what I'm doing most of the time.
Yeah.
So it was coined in about the 1970s. Irving Zola was the first person to use it. And then Crawford was the author who I think kind of operationalized it a little bit more and took a different perspective. And in the most basic sense, healthism would be the moralization of the pursuit and attainment of health. Mm-hmm. So in other words, in order to be considered a good person, you have to be considered by society to be a healthy person. Mm-hmm. And people are expected to pursue health regardless of the obstacles that might make it challenging for them. So his perspective was that while some aspects of healthism aren't necessarily harmful, like individual responsibility, if we use it as a surrogate for shared responsibility or for institutional change, it could potentially be harmful. Or if we use it in an oppressive way, assuming that everyone needs to fit a specific definition of health, that could also be harmful.
That is a lot to just even, it's so natural to take for granted the idea that we should pursue health. It really is quite mind-blowing, I suppose, to just contemplate, wait, is that really, so many decisions in life are a trade-off, right? And so is that always going to outweigh everything else is kind of one of the ways I've started to think about it.
Yeah. And even how we define health, because there are so many different facets. Mm-hmm. And I was on a podcast recently with Ben Coomer and Tom Bainbridge, and they did a part 1 on healthism, and they actually talked about health as being quite subjective, and it really is a values judgment. One of the best quotes that I can think of is by Kurt Vonnegut, and he said, "We are only as healthy as our ideas are humane." So I think that that gives kind of a different perspective, because often we're thinking about health in physical terms, in tangible terms. What's my blood pressure? What do my blood lipids look like? But is a person who has, excellent cardiometabolic health, but is going out and stabbing people, is that a healthy person? So we look at it in terms of, a set of behaviors, and we sort of evaluate people's health based on what they're doing. But sometimes we might also evaluate or assume their health based on their appearance. And certainly, that can be problematic and harmful.
Yeah, one of the layers to the conversation is of course the weight loss, debate, and the whole complex, I guess, relationship between body weight and health. Yeah, I really got my wheels turning on this. A dietitian that I really respect, Dr. Pamela Ferguson. She sees a lot of people who want to lose weight, but she started to want to back off of that in her practice because she sees it as, in her own words, it often does more harm than good. And at first I couldn't understand what she meant, but then I've explored that, and I think I really understand where she's starting to understand where she's coming from, although I haven't done personal coaching. So I think for those that coach people, you really see that.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's part of how my perspective has shifted as well. I think that it's not an extremist type of statement to say not all forms of weight loss are safe or healthy. Most people can get on board with that. And I think that most people can get on board with the fact that we can say, we don't need to lose weight to improve our health. Maybe fewer people can get on board with that. But I think where we start to see more derision and more just arguing and contention is when we're talking about the pros and cons of intentional weight loss in certain populations. And quite often, I think we lose the context, even when we're talking about the statistics of intentional weight loss and long-term weight loss management. It's really important to talk about, what we mean when we say something like diets don't work, or, intentional weight loss doesn't work. And we need to think about who we have in mind when we're saying things like that, and what sort of dietary practices we're thinking of when we say things like that. No group and no and diets as well. It's not monolith. It's not that like all diets look exactly the same, or that all weight loss maintenance looks exactly the same. So I think kind of paring down into the details and the real meaning behind those phrases might help us have more productive conversations, rather than taking these really kind of polarized stances on, things being always harmful or always beneficial. And the root of that really, I think, is also recognizing when healthism manifests. And that's why I kind of like that we started with that definition. And I think it's a common thread, in the debate about intentional weight loss, and in the debate about whether people can be healthy at a variety of body sizes, and whether people are obligated to change it if they're not healthy.
Yeah, I actually recently interviewed Dr. Nicola Guess, who works in diabetes prevention and management. And one of the themes that kept coming up is that the most effective dietary strategies tend to be the ones that cause you to lose weight. And in diabetes, there is a pretty direct link between excess body fat and your diabetes status. So somehow you have to reconcile that there are for many populations health benefits of weight loss, but should they pursue that is not a straightforward question, I guess. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And it really gets to one of the sort of nuanced details that I've picked up in watching these conversations and trying to find that middle ground, that it is true that when we look at the statistics on long-term weight loss maintenance, that most individuals do not maintain a loss of more than about 7% body weight. So even if they lost 15% of their body weight, when we take it out to 5 years after that initial dieting phase, they will have regained most of it. And we can say that probably happens in conservatively, 80% of people. But even that small percentage of body weight loss is still associated with improvements in cardiometabolic risk factors. So does long-term weight loss maintenance work in terms of just maintaining a large amount of body weight loss? Maybe not, but might we still get some benefit out of intentional weight loss? Maybe. But then we also have to look at how they got there, and was that weight loss attained in a way that mitigates the risk of intentional weight loss? So was it done for health purposes, and was it done with a focus on behaviors? I think the other thing is, there's a difference between telling someone to go on a diet to lose weight and helping someone make changes that may then result in weight loss. The outcome is the same, right? But how do we, what message are we sending? I think that matters as well. So certainly we can say that there are risks associated with certain body sizes. And health at every size doesn't posit that health is present at every size, but that every size individual, the size of an individual shouldn't prevent them from pursuing health or from engaging in health-seeking behaviors. It's just that we take intentional weight loss off as a focus because it's not a behavior that someone can change. It's just an outcome. And instead we focus on the behaviors.
Yeah, I like that distinction. In fact, a friend of mine who is has been on a weight roller coaster for a lot of her life said that she's consulted with her physician recently after regaining some of the weight, and he said this BMI focus is outdated, and now we focus on healthy behaviors.
Yes, yeah, exactly that. That I think so. The obesity paradox refers to findings in literature that would be counterintuitive, that in some cases, individuals with a BMI that would place them in the overweight or obese category actually have better health outcomes. And it probably indicates that BMI could be, something of a screening tool on a population level, but when it comes to an individual, it's not a strong predictor of their actual health status, because it doesn't account for things like body composition or their physical activity level or the length of time at which they have been in that specific category. And all of those factors play a role in the actual health status of the person. So, we can say that both, a lifestyle change that could result in weight loss, depending on how it's done, that could be beneficial for a person. And also that weight stigma has very negative and detrimental effects on a person. So those two things can exist, I think, in harmony. But people are kind of arguing, I think, over a belief system that isn't necessarily required when it comes to actually instituting those lifestyle changes, if that makes sense. Like whether we tell a person to go on a diet or not, they might want to change their lifestyle because it feels better. But, if we tell a person to go on a diet, or if we tell a person that their weight is a problem and makes them a less worthy or valuable person, that's always going to cause a problem. So it's, when we're kind of looking at the cost benefit ratio, what if we just said, hey, it's maybe not useful to say this thing, but if the outcome is, if we can get the same benefit, a person, sees benefit from a lifestyle change, can we reduce the harm and just find ways to make the beneficial aspects more accessible to them? How can we ensure that people have access to the resources that they need to support their health and reduce the stigma that is damaging them?
Dr. Fundaro, since we're referring to health at every size and HAES throughout our conversation, can you give us a definition there?
Yes. So HAES stands for Health at Every Size. So
Mm-hmm.
it is both an approach to care and also a social justice movement that aims to increase access to and information about resources that support well-being. And so this promotes change both at the individual level and also at the institutional level. So we inform individuals about the ways that they could support their well-being and their health, and we provide them with the resources to do that, and also the autonomy to decide not to do that if they don't want to. So
Mm-hmm.
contrary to popular belief, it doesn't promote the idea that people are healthy at every size, but rather that they should not be prevented from pursuing health at any size.
Mm-hmm. So, what are some of the common biases that people hold and may not even recognize either about themselves or about others?
Mm. I think there are a few main beliefs that we've seen emerge since the early 1900s regarding individuals in large bodies. It really started with the awareness, kind of public awareness and public knowledge about the science of energy balance and calories. So prior to the early 1900s, people didn't know what a calorie was. They didn't know about energy balance and that there was a cause effect relationship between food intake and weight gain.
Mm-hmm.
And so they thought that it was maybe something that was glandular, and it was associated with higher socioeconomic status. So people who tended to have more money and have more abundance, they were in larger bodies, and that was the ideal at the time. Around World War One, when food conservation was being promoted because we were sending our more energy dense foods overseas, and that combined with the awareness of calories, it gave birth to this idea that having a large body was synonymous with food hoarding. And so people were seen as un-American if they were in a large body. They were seen as wasteful, as greedy, and that they were lacking self-control and willpower. And rather than being a sign of abundance, it was a sign of just failures of the will. It was a failure to control oneself. So at a time when values were changing in the United States, and there was a focus more on moralism and purity and self-control
Mm-hmm.
and victory over the self, victory over the physical body, um, the perspective shifted, and that no longer was the ideal. So the thin
Mm-hmm.
ideal became more prominent, and it actually lasted throughout the war and even throughout the Great Depression,
Mm-hmm.
because at that point, rather than kind of reverting to the older ideals of abundance and being associated with a larger body, thinness was associated with higher socioeconomic status because people who were in the upper middle class and higher were kind of protected from food insecurity, and so they could sort of just for fun manipulate their body size. And so that's really most likely when those beliefs started to take hold in the United States.
Mm-hmm.
And today, a lot of people still have those beliefs. They still think that a person in a large body is a failed thin person, and that because of the way the healthcare system is set up, that they are using more of the healthcare resources, that there is a large economic cost in caring for the diseases associated with obesity.
Mm-hmm.
And so that is, so then people have a sense of those individuals perhaps shirking their individual responsibility to pursue health, and then everyone else has to pay for it. So I think those are kind of the main beliefs that people have that shape their biases.
I've also heard some people sort of pushing a little bit on this idea that the push to lose weight is sort of veiled as an attempt to make someone healthier, when really it's just sort of protecting this thin ideal and using health as an excuse. Do you have thoughts on that?
Yeah. Well, what I find really interesting is that, again, it kind of comes down to a very specific version of health. So weight loss is, and I kind of made a joke about this, that, like a person thinks I want to improve my health. And so they seek out a therapist. They want to improve their mental health. And society sort of says, no, not that kind of health. We mean the health we can see. Not that other kind of health doesn't matter. We want you to lose weight so we can see that you're healthy. And so, yeah, I think, when we present it under the auspices of this is for health, how do you actually know the health status of that person? Mm-hmm. You're still sort of just assuming that you know what it is, mm-hmm. Based on their body size. And B, if you know that person personally and they have confided in you that I don't feel like my life is in a healthy place and there's a lack of balance and I want to change these things, then you might say, okay, well, what do you want to change to help improve your health? Mm-hmm. And they'll give you their perspective of what that would look like. But just looking at a person that you don't know and saying, I really do care about you and your health, even though I know nothing about it or you, mm-hmm. or the context of your life, but mm-hmm. I'm betting that weight loss is the answer. I think that that's a little bit insincere. Mm-hmm. At the same time, I acknowledge that I think people are looking at the risks associated with obesity and saying, and I've seen this and heard this from individuals too, that there is sort of a pre-sickness. And this is one aspect of healthism as well, that everyone is sort of pre-sick. We are a collection of risk factors. And once we sort of pass a threshold of an acceptable number of risk factors, then it's on us to reduce those risk factors. So I still think that that's sort of that same manifestation. Mm-hmm. Even if we say that it's for that person's health, we're still making some assumptions about that person's health. Can we also do that while respecting a person's autonomy to not pursue health?
Yeah, I have to admit, this is something I've been sort of processing a lot, and just I feel like I have to, as much as I hate to admit it, I've bought into diet culture, hook, line, and sinker. And, it's taken me kind of 40 years to, now I'm in my 40s, to really question the role that plays in my life and mental wellness and the trade-offs you make. And when I see someone reject what appears to be rejecting that belief system, I don't know what to make of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I've grappled with that too. I can tell when I'm reading things and I'll get a sense of like, I don't know. I can feel the doubt without any evidence to the contrary of what I'm reading. I just know that like I have a set of beliefs and I'm okay with sitting with that feeling. Mm-hmm. And also, that I don't need to necessarily believe everything that I'm reading, but I make sure to consume information that might be contrary to my current belief system. Mm-hmm. And also foundationally seek out evidence-based, peer-reviewed, high-quality evidence, looking at systematic reviews and meta-analyses, so I can get a better understanding of the references, the statistics that people are referring to. Mm-hmm. But I think that that's a very normal experience. And it is also, I think, maybe threatening to some people who worry that acknowledging the limitations of intentional weight loss might do harm to the fitness industry. Mm-hmm. Because, to some extent, we have been selling the pursuit of this ideal. Mm-hmm. And we've been selling, some aspects of diet culture. Now, diet culture in itself really isn't monolith either. It's not that everyone is part of this one thing and we all do things the same way. Mm-hmm. Diet culture is not very well defined, and there are some, and I think it exists on a spectrum too. So we have sort of the extremes of bad diets and really harmful marketing, where we say like, no excuses. You gotta want it bad enough, and in a large body who's unhealthy, bad diets. So most people can get on board with like, that's not helpful. That's like super bad. Anybody wants that around. But then on the other end of the spectrum, we have just what people might call lifestyle change, which is still labeled diet culture by some. It's kind of a diet in disguise. Mm-hmm. So a lifestyle change might look like changing your physical activity habits, and changing your dietary pattern, and then the weight loss occurs, and so I think a lot of people might say, well, I don't know what's wrong with that. And I think that's a good question. I'm not saying that I know what's wrong with that, but just saying that, we need to make space for these various opinions and perspectives and try to see, where we can find some middle ground. Because in most cases, people are looking at the central tenets of health at every size and just its movement to increase access to resources that support well-being. A lot of people are on board with that. Where we see the friction is when we're having discussions about whether obesity can be healthy, whether, and then we lose sight of the whole rest of the movement and just focus on this one topic and have all these arguments about it. And then people are less likely to seek out information associated with those perspectives. So intuitive eating is a HAES aligned approach, but intuitive eating is not the same thing as HAES or health at every size. Yeah. So that's just one example. They conflate those two.
Yeah. So to wrap things up, I wanted to leave people with some advice and some resources to learn more. Because as I said, this is really just scratching the surface. So in terms of, I'm sure there's a world of resources, but your website is awesome. And any other resources that you tend to tap into yourself when you're trying to learn about these topics?
Yeah. There's a few textbooks that I think have been super helpful. What really got me started on this was Modern Food, Moral Food by Vite. So it's actually a food anthropology textbook, and it takes a historical perspective of calorie counting. So there's also Weighing In by Julie Guthman. And she takes sort of a socioeconomic perspective about obesity and people's beliefs about it and its potential economic impacts and also impacts of stigma on individuals. There's Paradox of Plenty by Levinstein. So that actually picks up where Modern Food, Moral Food left off, looking at Depression era dieting all the way through about the 1990s. If you want to gain some perspective on sort of the history of diet and culture, you can actually find some interesting, really old diet books online, like PDF version. So one that I found recently is called Diet and Die by Carl Malmberg. It's probably the first anti-diet book. It was written in 1935. So you can find that. Open access online. Yeah, it's really interesting. Or looking at, there was another book that was written, I think, in 1918 called Reducing New Waistlines for Old, I think, something like that. Okay. So it's interesting to read those, and I think it's useful because we gain, I think, a greater view, kind of like a 360 view of where we are now and where we've come from and how much we repeat ourselves. So there are also some websites. So if people want to learn more about HAES, they can go to the ASDA website. So it's the Association for Size, Diversity, and Health. And there's also the HAES website, so Health at Every Size. Lindo Bacon wrote the book Health at Every Size, and they have both a master's and PhD in nutrition and exercise phys, which I think people are actually surprised to hear and may not be aware of. So, and those are obviously going to take one perspective. There's also the book Anti-Diet by Christy Harrison. So those are some of the main books in that area, but there are other books you might be interested in reading, like Fat So by Miriam Wan. So that is a book that is a fat activist perspective. Okay. Of course, I don't dissuade people from looking at the literature as well. So if you go to the CDC and NIH websites, you can actually find the data that I think people are pulling from when they're looking at long-term weight loss maintenance. And then Kevin Hall's study was sort of a landmark study looking at that 5-year window of weight loss maintenance. So I encourage people to really, get a perspective of both sides. You don't have to buy a book because you agree with it, or because it confirms your biases, but just get the book, read it, see what you think about it. If you don't agree with anything that it has to say, that's totally fine. And you don't need to change your mind, in response. But I think it's just helpful to really have a better understanding of what another group might be saying.
Yeah.
and then see if we can, create some shared meaning and understanding in that.